At 6:17 a.m. on a rainy Monday in Grayfield, Oregon, a woman slid a garment rack to steam a dress and saw the closet baseboard lift a half-inch. The seam wasn't drywall, it was a door. She pressed. The panel flexed, a magnetic catch released, and cool air spilled from a small, humming dehumidifier inside a space that shouldn't have existed. The room was 6 feet by 10, painted flat black, lined with rigid foam, and wired to a separate surge strip. On the left, 3 metal shelving units, each shelf numbered in thermal label tape. On the right, a pegboard with identical canvas pouches, zip ties hung in rows, and a plastic bin of disposable gloves by size. At the back, 2 locking cabinets, a fireproof box, and a folding table with a mat cutting board and a calibrated steel ruler. A spiral-bound notebook lay open to a hand-drawn index. Page 1 listed dates, locations, and initials. Next to each entry was a page reference, a star or a circle. The stars repeated across years. She photographed the doorframe, the hinges, the index, and the cabinets, then stepped out and shut the panel. From the hallway, the house looked normal again. Nursery down the left, guest room at the end, coffee machine beeping in the kitchen. In her phone, the photos showed something else. Driver's licenses laminated into plastic sleeves, hotel key cards grouped by city, Metro cards rubber-banded by color, and a corkboard of printed maps with red thread drawn to trailheads and parking lots. The title on the notebook cover was one word in block letters: collection. Within an hour, a first response team would see the same inventory, and add a new word to the case file. Victims. Grayfield is a logging town turned bedroom community, 40 minutes from Portland, with cul-de-sacs, newly built craftsmans, and a river trail that disappears into fir woods. The couple at the center of this case lived on Alder Ridge Court. Claire Marin, 33, a freelance textile designer who worked from a day sunroom studio, and Evan Marin, 36, an electrical contractor who specialized in high-end home theaters and hidden wiring. They had a 6-month-old daughter and a mortgage approved after Evan showed 2 strong fiscal years and a clean background check. Neighbors described predictable routines: joggers at dawn, delivery vans by noon, sprinklers at dusk. Claire's parents visited Sundays. Evan left early most weekdays in a wrapped van, returned after dark with invoices and tool cases. The house was recent construction, 3 bedrooms, a finished attic, and, as the floor plans later confirmed, no authorized crawlspace adjoining the primary suite closet. Police records show no prior calls to the address. Financials showed standard debt service, a modest savings cushion, and no flagged transactions. Their social profiles recorded home renovations, a birth announcement, and Evan's contract photos from audio installs. On paper, the Marins were unremarkable. The hidden room created the first contradiction. The second emerged when the index inside it matched dates tied to missing person reports within a 2-hour radius. The sequence begins with a home repair task and ends with a perimeter of squad cars. On a Thursday afternoon, Claire Marin moved seasonal boxes to clear the primary closet floor. A baseboard felt hollow. She lifted a shoe rack, found 4 drywall screws that didn't match the builder's hardware, and tested a seam with a putty knife. The panel swung inward on concealed piano hinges. Behind it, a framed passage opened to a narrow, finished void. 8 feet long, 4 feet wide, carpeted, and sound-insulated with mass-loaded vinyl stapled behind MDF. A low shelf ran the length of the wall. On it sat a ledger-style binder, 6 plastic evidence bins with tamper-seal stickers, and a black Pelican case with a keyed lock. Claire stepped out, photographed the opening, and returned with latex gloves and her phone's flashlight. The binder's tab system listed dates and initials. Each entry paired a location, highway turnouts, river access points, a storage complex, with brief bullet, notes, and alphanumeric codes. The plastic bins contained items sealed in smaller bags. Strands of long hair braided and zip-tied, a folded bandana with soil embedded, a broken charm bracelet, a car key with the logo filed off, a hotel keycard, and a square of duct tape adhered to release paper. The Pelican case fit a key Claire had on a shared ring, unlabeled and previously unexplained. Inside were 3 SSDs, a micro SD roll, and a thumb drive labeled with a heat transfer labeler. Catalog AV. Claire backed out, closed the panel, and left the closet undisturbed. She moved to the kitchen, secured the front and back doors, and contacted the county dispatch. The call log shows she used precise language: hidden room, unknown contents, potential evidence, spouse off-site. She remained on the front porch until responding officers arrived. Patrol conducted a sweep, confirmed no one else was inside, and established a soft perimeter. Body-worn camera footage shows the moment the panel reopened. The first sergeant halted movement, photographed the void, and requested detectives and a forensics team. Rooms were taped off. The infant was transferred to Claire's parents, who lived 12 minutes away. Detectives inventoried the shelf and case in situ, then secured them for transport. A cursory look at the binder cross-referenced entries with 3 active missing person cases from neighboring counties, all female, all outdoor last-seen points near river access or trailheads. The house search expanded. In the attic, investigators found a compact network-attached storage unit mounted behind a removable HVAC return grill, connected to a PoE switch and labeled circuits. In the garage, they logged a concealed license plate bracket with hinge hardware, 2 magnetic GPS trackers, a lock bypass kit, nitrile gloves, contractor-grade trash bags, and a tool roll consistent with specialty electrical work. On a high shelf, a tote containing microphones, 2 pinhole cameras, and adhesive mounts. None of the serial numbers were registered to Evan's business accounts. At approximately 6:40 p.m., Evan Marin's phone stopped updating its location along the interstate loop. Security cameras later showed him exiting a job site at 4:52 p.m., loading cases into his wrapped van, and turning away from his normal route home. Receipts placed him at a big box store purchasing a prepaid smartphone, batteries, a gas can, and 2 gallons of distilled water. A cash withdrawal followed at an ATM outside a grocery store. 10 minutes later, an LPR, license plate reader, recorded the van's plate entering a state forest corridor. A subsequent camera on the same corridor did not log the van exiting. Detectives flagged the movement as evasive. A bolo went out. A sheriff's drone unit was deployed at first light. Overnight, the forensics team cloned the drives from the Pelican case. They also imaged the NS hidden behind the return grill. Preliminary review revealed time-stamped folders with standardized naming conventions, geotagged thumbnails, and audio files labeled by date and route segments. Several thumbnails showed roadside shoulders, culverts, and trailheads at night, illuminated by headlights. One clip, tagged with coordinates matching a missing person report, captured the approach to a river access gate and a subsequent stationary view of a parked sedan tail lamp reflecting in near darkness. Back at the residence, floor-level dust prints inside the void matched a narrow-soled work boot. The MDF showed repeated contact marks where the binder and bins had been slid in and out. In the garage, latent prints on the Pelican case matched Evan. The glove box of the van, when it was later recovered, contained a laminated map with grease pencil marks circling 5 rural pull-offs across 3 counties. A second key to the closet lock panel was found on Evan's keyring inside a jacket left in the bedroom. Near midnight, a burned vehicle report came in from a turnout off a logging road. Fire units arrived to find a wrapped electrical van fully involved. The VIN plate was scorched but legible. It matched Evan's business vehicle. The interior was gutted. Under the passenger seat springs, investigators recovered a partially melted phone mount and a micro SD adapter fused to plastic, a component consistent with the media found in the house. Tire tracks led from the turnout to a secondary Jeep trail and were lost on rock. Boot impressions from the turnout shared general pattern characteristics with the prints documented in the Marin garage. By dawn, law enforcement set a grid search from the turnout to the river. A K-9 cadaver team hit on a shallow scrape, near a culvert, but no remains. Downstream, searchers found a contractor bag caught in snags. Inside were cut zip ties, a section of nylon rope, and a roll of duct tape with edges consistent with the square preserved in the void. Laboratory comparison later confirmed the tape segment from the house roll. Throughout the night, the digital forensic team parsed the catalog AV drive. An index file tied each media folder to a code found in the binder. 3 codes overlapped with the initials and last seen dates of the open missing person cases. One folder included a recorded drive path to a decommissioned water treatment access road. Another showed a gravel pullout with road salt heaps visible, identifiable to county maintenance logs for a specific depot. The metadata indicated careful planning and recurring patrols of the same sites on multiple nights. The incident escalated from a domestic discovery to a presumed serial abduction homicide investigation within 6 hours. Claire provided a sworn statement, turned over her devices, and was released to family. A warrant issued for Evans' arrest on suspicion of aggravated kidnapping, tampering with physical evidence, and arson, pending recovery of remains and further corroboration. The public narrative remained minimal while the search extended to storage rentals and old job sites linked to his electrical contracts. Detectives organized parallel tracks: digital forensics, site searches, financial tracing, and victimology. The digital track opened with the cloned SSDs and the hidden NS. Analysts built a timeline by hashing file metadata against the binder's coded entries. Hash collisions were clean. The catalog had no duplicates, suggesting deliberate curation. Geotags pointed to 8 recurring zones in 3 counties. Each zone had tiers: reconnaissance images, approach shots, and static mounts. Timestamps clustered between 10:30 p.m. and 2:00 a.m., aligning with lane closures and minimal traffic. On the NAS, investigators found a lightweight web interface cached locally, with a custom folder naming scheme and a manifest file that referenced a routing table. That table contained waypoint strings formatted like job tickets. Cross-referencing with Evan Marin electrical invoices showed that multiple after-hours maintenance calls were billed to commercial clients at or near the same coordinates as the catalog zones. This explained legitimate presence in remote corridors and offered cover for repeated nights on the same routes. A warrant for cloud accounts tied to the business domain surfaced static IP sessions into a VPN exit node during the same windows. Logins were short, suggesting single-purpose uploads or checks. Router logs seized from the home confirmed outbound connections to the NAS via a separate VLAN, isolated from the household network. A concealed PoE camera discovered in the garage had microSD storage disabled. Its live feed was pointed toward the workbench where Pelican cases were prepped. Search teams expanded from the burned van turnout. They located a buried 5-gallon bucket 50 yards off a service spur. Inside were nitrile gloves, zip ties, and a folded Tyvek suit, all heat-sealed in bags. Soil in the bucket base matched silt from a nearby culvert, indicating on-site staging. A secondary bucket, empty but with adhesive transfer consistent. With duct tape was found near a line of river willow. Drone thermal imaging flagged 2 depressions in hardpan. Core sampling retrieved fibers matching the color and weave of the bandana from the closet bin. Victimology tied 3 open cases to the zones. Last seen points near trailheads, vehicles left with windows cracked, and scattered personal effects. In each, phone locations went dark near known blind spots between towers. A radio frequency technician mapped those shadows and overlaid them with the catalog's recurring pullouts. The matches were tight. Investigators inferred that the offender selected approach lanes with degraded coverage, used short-range movement off-road, and returned via alternative exits with limited cameras. Financial tracing showed purchases of adhesive mounts, micro cameras, and storage media routed through third-party sellers with gift cards. The gift cards came from grocery chains. Security footage documented a hooded buyer with body posture and gait, consistent with Evan. Gas cans and distilled water purchased shortly before the van fire aligned with arson prep. Lab reports from the turnout confirmed accelerant residues. A storage unit in a neighboring county, rented under a dissolved LLC, yielded a work table, a folding chair, and a pegboard with missing outlines for tools. On a shelf sat a metal detector, a landscaper's soil probe, a hand winch, and a roll of 332 steel cable with frayed ends. The unit's floor showed faint caster tracks leading to the door and back. Blue painter's tape on the wall had handwritten dates overlapping with binder entries. A small refrigerator contained only bottled water and electrolyte packets, with lot codes matching those found in the Marin garage. Digital analysts processed the AV Drives index file. 3 folders contained dash mount clips of staging. Road cones set in a triangle at night, a flasher placed on the asphalt shoulder, and reflective vests laid out on the van's hood. This suggested a false flag breakdown scenario. Another folder included body-worn angles taken at waist height. Frames showed a roadside distance marker and a reflective "No Motors" sign at a trail gate used in one of the missing person cases. A separate audio file captured ambient water movement and intermittent metallic clinks consistent with a pry bar against a padlock shackle. The catalog referenced the clip as Gate 3, Test. The gate vicinity became a priority dig. A breakthrough came from toolmark analysis. The hidden panel screws in the closet bore a distinctive triangular burr. A similar burr appeared on padlock remnants recovered from a county maintenance depot dumpster days after a reported break-in the prior year. The depot's internal report never identified a suspect. Re-examined footage from that night captured a wrapped electrical van parked beside a salt shed, license plate obscured with a hinged bracket. Hinge hardware in the Marin garage matched the bracket type. Cell site analysis for Evan's personal phone was sparse due to predictable toggling into airplane mode in late hours. However, Wi-Fi handshake logs from a Trailhead Ranger kiosk recorded a MAC address associated with the travel router found in Evan's tool roll. The router's alias in its config referenced the dissolved LLC used for the storage unit. That handshake time lined up with a binder code tied to a missing person last seen date. A warrant for water utility. Cameras on intake roads returned 2 stills of the van near midnight 3 weeks prior. Reflective tape on the rear door aligned with minor scuffs documented during a pre-incident HOA violation photo, tying the vehicle to Evan beyond dispute. In the van's burned cabin, investigators recovered the head of a specialty punch tool from beneath melted plastic. Residue analysis was consistent with the tool roll gaps in the storage unit. Detectives interviewed former co-workers. Records showed Evan frequently volunteered for night shifts and off-hours power cabinet work. He had access to lockout-tagout gear and new alarm blind spots. Purchase histories demonstrated acquisitions of disposable coveralls and boot covers in mixed sizes. This correlated with the narrow dust tracks in the hidden room and a second, slightly wider boot impression at the storage unit, indicating occasional assistance or decoy use. No immediate accomplice surfaced through phone or bank ties. Ground teams returned to the decommissioned water treatment road highlighted in the catalog. A cadaver K9 alerted near a riprap embankment. Excavation exposed a contractor bag sealed with a knot technique matching zip tie patterns in the closet bins. Inside were fabric fibers consistent with the bandana and a bracelet charm matching the broken piece logged earlier. DNA on hair recovered from the bag matched one of the missing women. This shifted the case from suspected to confirmed homicide. Forensics from the Pelican SSDs also recovered deleted thumbnail caches. One cache contained a blurred figure reflected in a van side mirror. Enhancement was limited, but jacket striping matched a work coat retrieved from Evan's bedroom closet. Overlay with height markers from the garage door frame produced a consistent stature estimate. Body mechanics in the reflection aligned with the depot footage posture. Investigators subpoenaed toll transponder records for a commercial account tied to the business, the car. Transponder had been intermittently shielded with foil, evidenced by gaps in logs and adhesive residue found inside the windshield frame of the burned van. When unshielded, crossings placed the van in sync with 3 binder-coated patrol loops that preceded each victim's disappearance by days, indicating pre-incident surveillance. A forensic accountant mapped cash withdrawals preceding equipment purchases. Each withdrawal occurred at ATMs positioned on the outskirts of zones later cataloged. The pattern implied a single drive plan: withdraw cash, buy supplies, scout, and document. A separate flag came from a rural hardware store that recorded sales of piano hinges, MDF sheets cut to custom dimensions, and mass-loaded vinyl, the exact materials used in the closet void. As pieces converged, the investigative team established a probable route for disposal. The route included a low-water bridge with a culvert grate. Divers found cut sections of cable with hair entanglement, a pry bar, and multiple plastic ties fused by silt. The pry bar's tool mark striations matched impressions on a storage unit padlock. A residue sample from the cable matched lubricant found on a shelf in Evan's garage. This chain connected his workspace, his storage, his vehicle, and the river corridor. At this stage, detectives concluded that the offender had engineered an infrastructure of concealment: a hidden room for cataloging, a storage unit for staging, and commercial cover for mobility. The discovery of DNA tying a victim to items within his network closed critical loops. An arrest warrant remained active with upgraded charges, including murder. Task force units canvassed rural short-term rentals and campground check-ins using the business name and van description. A daytime tip from a bait shop clerk pointed to a man matching Evan's description purchasing heavy test fishing line and lead weights. That location sat 15 miles downriver from the burned van turnout. The case pivoted from multi-county suspicion to coordinated manhunt. With a confirmed homicide link, the district attorney authorized public release of the suspect's image and vehicle identifiers, sans catalog details, to protect evidentiary integrity. The investigative narrative was now anchored in physical links, tool marks, digital footprints, and recovered DNA, sufficient to proceed even without a confession or immediate recovery of all remains. The first break didn't come from a lab. It came from property records. A clerk noticed that the dissolved LLC leasing the storage unit also owned a narrow strip of unusable land abutting a flood channel purchased for cash 18 months earlier. Survey maps showed a gated maintenance spur, Gate 3, in the catalog. The land served no purpose except one: control. With ownership, trespass complaints could be deflected, and nighttime presence looked legitimate. Investigators realized the offender hadn't just exploited blind spots, he had acquired them. A second shock surfaced from the NAS manifest. An overlooked JSON field, labeled RET, contained short alphanumeric strings appended to several root entries. Cross-checking them against state procurement portals revealed they were truncated bid IDs for electrical contracts, projects with predictable night closures. The catalog wasn't improvisation. It was drafted against public schedules months in advance. Each disappearance aligned with windows when roads were officially dark, cameras down, and detours normalized. The offender had engineered the environment before selecting the victim. Then came the burned van's ECU pull. Manufacturer support reconstructed partial trip logs the fire didn't destroy, accelerometer spikes, brake applications, and speed events. On 3 nights tied to separate victims, the ECU recorded identical stop-start rhythms: 32 seconds idle, 6 feet forward, 32 seconds idle. A traffic reconstructionist recognized the pattern: manual winching with the vehicle in neutral, inching loads up an incline. The unit wasn't just transport, it was a powered anchor for moving weight. Forensics returned another anomaly. The AV drive's deleted thumbnails contained a recurring watermark fragment, 2 faint letters at the lower left of several frames. Enhancements resolved them to ST, audio spectrograms of wind and road noise from the same clips, showed a low hum at a constant frequency. A power quality engineer identified it as a nearby transformer's signature unique to the South Tap substation. ST likely denoted South Tap, not a person. When analysts mapped ST flagged clips against the routing table, a consistent orbit emerged around the substation's service roads. It wasn't random hunting. It was a hub-and-spoke capture design with a quiet, electrified center to mask sound and light. An evidence tech revisiting the closet void found scuffs on the rear gypsum inconsistent with box movement. Infrared revealed a taped rectangle. Behind it was a shallow cavity holding a sealed envelope marked with 3 binder codes. Inside, 6 driver's licenses, all genuine, belonging to women not yet linked to the case. DMV checks showed each had reported wallets stolen over 2 years within the Tri-County area, often at grocery stores with adjacent gas pumps, places where the offender routinely bought gift cards and fuel. The significance was immediate. He had scoped potential victims long before abductions, harvesting IDs to test surveillance habits, addresses, and patterns. The missing weren't chance targets. They were outcomes of an extended triage. Parallel to this, the medical examiner flagged microabrasions on recovered bracelet metal coated with a residue that wasn't from soil or river water. Lab analysis identified fine particulates of aluminum oxide and phenolic resin, abrasive dust typical of belt sanders used on circuit boards and die-cut plastics. A search warrant for Avon's workshop uncovered a compact electronics bench hidden under a false drawer. There, officers found a micro-soldering station, epoxy syringes, and a tray of trimmed micro-SD shells. It reframed the necklace and the AV media. The offender didn't just hide chips, he customized and disguised them for redundancy and throwaway storage. The biggest twist arrived via the routing table's fallback column, previously dismissed as empty. A junior analyst noticed the column populated only on routes that had later been paved or had their gates replaced. The fallback entries pointed to culverts, siphon boxes, and defunct irrigation valves, subsurface features unlikely to be disturbed. When teams inspected a boxed siphon on a decommissioned canal, they found a bolted service lid with fresh tool marks and marine-grade sealant. Inside a dry pocket above the flow line sat a watertight case fixed with hose clamps. It held 3 solid-state drives, desiccant, and a laminated card with a time grid. The drives mirrored parts of the catalog but also contained something new: post folders with date stamps weeks after each known disappearance. They documented nightly returns to sites, rotations of decoy artifacts, and removal of materials in stages. Prolonged scene management designed to confound any delayed discovery. Another case in the siphon box contained a disposable phone, power off, battery taped. When imaged, it revealed a single text thread to a number registered to a roadside assistance service. Messages contained only mile markers and single letters, C, D, R, on dates aligned with missing person alerts. Investigators contacted the service. The number belonged to a contract driver who routinely patrolled closures and detours. The driver claimed the texts were anonymous tips about debris or animals, but his logs showed he drove through the offender's mapped zones within minutes of those messages and lingered off the shoulder with hazards active. His dashcam footage, retained by policy, revealed the offender's van staged ahead with cones and a flasher, creating natural slowdowns. The accomplice wasn't a co-conspirator in the abductions. He was an unwitting shield, providing cover and legitimacy to stopped vehicles and detours, an exploited variable in the scheme. Meanwhile, the property deed twist produced a second land parcel, this one containing a dilapidated pump house. Inside, investigators found the first unambiguous confinement evidence, a steel anchor eye set into the slab, a plywood box with ventilation holes and interior sound-dampening foam, and a narrow observation slit cut at knee level. The foam bore DNA from 2 victims. In a corner, a 5-inch stack of printed route tables, but these had pen annotations, weather notes, traffic counts, and one-line evaluations. Gate noise audible, line of sight from Ranch Road, ditch carriage heavy silt. It was a continuous improvement log for abductions and concealment. Finally, the most unsettling reveal: a set of training clips hidden in a nested folder labeled QA. They depicted daylight rehearsals at remote sites using sandbags and dummies to test rope angles, pulley setups, and load carriage. Each clip began with a shot of a paper checklist on a clipboard. The checklists matched forms in the binder, same typography, same codes, same sign-offs. The offender measured his crimes like projects, with test plans and acceptance steps. This wasn't compulsion erupting at random. It was a manufactured system with procurement, rehearsal, execution, and post-incident maintenance. The cumulative effect of these twists was to invert the original frame. What started as evidence of a hidden room and a set of illicit recordings expanded into proof of territorial control, schedule manipulation, pre-victimization scouting, environmental engineering, iterative testing, and long-tail scene management. With DNA hits, property links, physical anchors, and mirrored media, the narrative no longer depended on inference. It demonstrated design. That design contained its own vulnerability. The fallback caches were time-stamped. The post folders tied the offender to sites on dates after publicized searches. The ownership of the land and the pump house created prosecutable chains, and the ECU's inching logs contradicted any claim of mere presence without engagement. The case shifted from who and where to how many and how far, and positioned prosecutors to charge beyond a single homicide. Prosecutors filed a multi-count indictment anchored by first-degree murder, kidnapping, aggravated assault, unlawful confinement, and evidence tampering. Conspiracy was added through the Environmental Engineering Acts, land acquisitions, cache construction, and scheduled closures that facilitated abductions. The state elected to pursue a death-eligible count on the primary homicide tied to the pump house DNA. Parallel counts covered 2 no-body cases using the catalog, ECU logs, and biological trace evidence as the backbone. Pre-trial litigation focused on digital admissibility and the scope of search. Defense challenged the closet void seizure, alleging an exploratory rummage. The court found the second void entry was within the original warrant's expanded parameters because investigators documented the structural anomaly, photographed the taped rectangle, and articulated probable cause for further intrusion. The NAS and solid-state drives survived a suppression motion after. Examiners presented a stepwise imaging log. Hashes at seizure, hashes at lab intake, and matching verification hashes prior to analysis, creating a clean chain of custody. The defense sought to exclude ECU telemetry as unreliable. The state produced the manufacturer's custodian of records and a reconstruction expert who validated the sampling rate, fault tolerance, and integrity of the inching pattern as consistent with winch use. Jury selection emphasized technical literacy without bias toward law enforcement. Prosecutors sequenced the case thematically, not chronologically. First, they established domain control, deeds, LLC dissolutions, right-of-way maps, and the maintenance spur at Gate 3. Second, they proved design and rehearsal, the QA clips, clipboard checklists, and matched binder typography. Third, they demonstrated execution pathways, routing tables, fallback, culvert coordinates, and the siphon box cache with mirrored post folders. Fourth, they tied the design to a victim, mitochondrial DNA from the foam in the pump house, ligature fiber matches to cordage recovered from the workshop, and bracelet particulates tracing to electronics abrasion in the same space. The defense advanced an alternative actor theory and contamination. They proposed that the dissolved LLCs were shell vehicles used by an unknown third party and that the binder materials were planted. To blunt that claim, the state walked the jury through purchase funds originating from the defendant's personal line of credit, recorded payments to the property clerk from the defendant's bank, and 2 email confirmations recovered from his home router's cache showing document receipt for the parcels in his name. For contamination, the state leaned on redundancy. DNA in separate rooms, recovered on separate days by different teams, under separate evidence seals, all pointing to the same 2 victims. The redundancy principle undercut the single-point failure argument. Expert testimony anchored the technical edges. A traffic engineer explained how planned night closures reduce through traffic and lower detection risk at choke points, aligning with the catalog's targeted windows. A power systems analyst mapped the transformer hum signature in the ST clips to the South Tap substation, narrowing the origin of several videos. A metadata specialist addressed the fallback column and demonstrated that entries populated only after official gate upgrades, showing adaptive behavior over months. A forensic accountant charted the purchase and dissolution cadence of shell entities against the timeline of disappearances, creating a visual concordance the jury could follow. 2 pieces of evidence drew the courtroom's sustained attention. First, the siphon box case containing mirrored post folders with timestamps dated after publicized searches. Those dates established presence and scene manipulation after investigators left, supporting tampering and abuse of corpse counts. Second, the ECU inching logs synchronized with night closure permits. A montage of accelerometer spikes matched winch line tension changes recorded in the QA rehearsal clips. The side-by-side alignment presented motive-free proof of method. Mid-trial, the state granted use immunity to the roadside assistance driver. He testified to neutral patrols, hazard sets, and routine debris calls matching anonymous texts from the disposable phone. His dashcam clips placed his truck behind the defendant's van in 2 cataloged routes. The state framed him as an unwitting amplifier of the defendant's ruse, not a co-actor. The testimony diffused defense attempts to shift liability. The defendant did not testify. The defense case relied on challenging interpretation, suggesting the pump house anchor eye was for equipment storage, the plywood box, a sound-dampening cabinet, and the observation slit a ventilation compromise. The state answered with scale photographs, showing wrist-level height of the slit, interior scuffing consistent with restraints, and foam particle transfer matching the victim's clothing fibers. A biomechanics expert demonstrated that the anchor eye's depth and epoxy footprint exceeded requirements for shelving, but matched tensile loads necessary to resist a struggling person tethered at ankle height. Closing arguments compressed the system into 3 words: acquire, test, deploy. The prosecution asserted that land, closures, and caches were the acquisition of advantage. QA videos and checklists were testing, and the cataloged routes with fallback sites were deployment. They reminded jurors that no single piece needed to carry the case. The structure proved itself. The defense repeated a reasonable doubt refrain built on the absence of complete bodies and the inferential nature of some links. They asked jurors to resist the pull of pattern, warning that complexity can simulate certainty. The jury deliberated over 2 days. They returned guilty verdicts on first-degree murder for the pump house victim, guilty on kidnapping and unlawful confinement for the 2 no-body counts, guilty on evidence tampering, and guilty on criminal enterprise under the state's organized crime statute due to the coordinated use of shell companies and assets to facilitate felonies. On the death-eligible count, the penalty phase weighed aggravators, abduction, prolonged confinement, calculated planning, against mitigators offered by the defense. The panel recommended life without parole. The court imposed consecutive life sentences plus additional terms on the enterprise and tampering counts. Civil actions followed. Families of the missing sued the dissolved LLCs and the defendant personally. The court appointed a receiver to liquidate parcels and auction equipment. The Public Utilities Commission initiated audits of night closure protocols with new requirements for independent monitoring and live equipment inventories during maintenance windows. The county recorded policy changes. Mandatory dashcam uploads within 24 hours for contracted roadside assistance after any shoulder stop inside a closure zone, and cross-notification between property clerks and law enforcement for cash acquisitions of infrastructure-adjacent slivers. With sentencing complete, custody transferred to state corrections. The receiver's sale notices hit the legal classifieds. The maintenance spur at Gate 3 was welded shut and the pump house slab cored and filled. The siphon box lid was replaced with a tamper-evident plate and a new inspection regime. The catalog, binder, and drives entered permanent evidence storage under A. Hold order to preserve them for any future identifications, acknowledging that the count of victims might not be final. The case closed with a structure the jury could follow: acquisition of advantage, rehearsed method, and deployment against targets. The defendant received life without parole for the pump house murder, consecutive terms for kidnapping and unlawful confinement in the 2 no-body counts, and additional time for criminal enterprise and tampering. Civil receivership liquidated Shell-owned parcels. Proceeds funded victim compensation and ongoing identifications tied to the biological traces recovered from the site network. The county sealed the maintenance spur and retrofitted the siphon box with tamper-evident hardware. Utilities rewrote closure protocols and added independent monitors, live inventories, and mandatory dashcam uploads for roadside assistance within restricted zones. The catalog, binder pages, and mirrored post folders remained under hold at the evidence depot. For investigators, they functioned as a backlog of unanswered alarms, partial DNA profiles awaiting kinship, matches, microfibers cross-referenced to missing persons, and route overlays that continued to surface potential search areas. Families measured closure by policy change rather than recovery. The town's map, once ordinary, was now a diagram of exploited edges, culverts, farm spurs, and utility corridors reframed as choke points. This record leaves direct questions for viewers. Which safeguard failed first? The land sales without scrutiny, the unobserved night closures, or the unchallenged cash logistics? What additional checks at the property clerk, utility control room, or roadside dispatch would have introduced friction early enough to stop the pattern? If you were tasked with one reform with real cost attached, would you fund independent closure monitors, require escrowed ownership disclosures near critical infrastructure, or automate ECU telemetry audits during restricted hours?